Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope stars Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, Alec Guinness, Anthony Daniels, Kenny Baker, Peter Mayhew, David Prowse and James Earl Jones. Cinematography is by Gilbert Taylor and music is by John Williams. The movie was written and directed by George Lucas, the man responsible for THX 1138, American Graffiti and the Indiana Jones movies. What's the story? A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Thrilling John Williams orchestral music plays over emerging text on the screen. This is exactly how Saturday morning action serials such as Flash Gordon started back in the 1930s. The narrative tells us the story so far. Apparently we are already on episode 4. We learn that a rebel alliance is fighting an evil galactic empire, and the rebels have just stolen some plans to a new weapon called the Death Star. The camera tilts down to reveal a couple of moons above the desert planet of Tatooine. This is an impressive special effects shot for 1977. A rebel cruiser then passes overhead, chased by an Imperial Star Destroyer, and everyone in the theatre collectively wets their pants. This is arguably one of the most spectacular opening shots in movie history. Inside the rebel cruiser, a humanoid robot called C-3PO, played by Anthony Daniels, stumbles down a hallway alongside his small astrodroid sidekick, R2-D2, played by Kenny Baker. Despite being a robot, it seems that C-3PO has a nervous disposition and he predicts their imminent destruction. Imperial stormtroopers blast their way onto the rebel ship and cut through a defensive line of rebel soldiers. C-3PO and R2-D2 are forced to flee. Following on the footsteps of the stormtroopers is Darth Vader, played by David Prowse and voiced by James Earl Jones. Vader's costume is all black, which is a direct contrast to the stormtrooper white. Vader has a commanding presence. He is about a foot taller than everyone else, he wears a cape, and he breathes with a respirator. It is an ominous sound. In the confusion of battle, C-3PO loses sight of R2-D2. When C-3PO catches up with him again, we see that he has been passed something by a mysterious and beautiful woman. This is Princess Leia Organa, played by Carrie Fisher. Leia slips away and C-3PO calls upon R2-D2 to get moving before the battle catches up to them. By now the stormtroopers have control of the rebel cruiser. Vader is informed that the Death Star plans are not in the main computer. Frustrated, Vader hauls a rebel soldier into the air with one hand and chokes him to death. While the stormtroopers go looking for the cruiser's passengers, R2-D2 shuffles onto an escape pod. In a series of beeps and whistles, R2-D2 explains to C-3PO that he's on a secret mission. C-3PO is reluctant to follow, but blaster fire behind him leaves C-3PO no other option but to follow R2-D2. They both get inside the escape pod and are jettisoned from the rebel cruiser. Princess Leia is brought to Vader. Leia denies being part of the rebel alliance, and she claims not to know anything about any secret plans, but Vader does not believe her. As Vader walks away, he tells the commander next to him that Leia may know the location of the secret rebel base. This may be an opportunity to crush the rebellion once and for all. Meanwhile, on Tatooine, C-3PO and R2-D2 have left their escape pod and are traipsing over the sand dunes. C-3PO moans constantly, and an argument soon develops over which way to go. C-3PO storms off in one direction, leaving R2-D2 to his own devices. We can't understand what R2-D2 is saying, but we get a sense that he has the personality and vulnerabilities of a small child. Sometime later, C-3PO spots a gigantic transporter on the horizon. He's saved. Unfortunately, R2-D2 hasn't been so lucky. He finds himself in a canyon and stalked by small hooded creatures behind the rocks. These creatures are called Jawas. The Jawas jump out and capture R2-D2. They take R2-D2 back to their transporter, which is the same transporter spotted by C-3PO earlier. After being fitted with a restraining bolt, R2-D2 is sucked up onto the transporter. When R2-D2 wakes up, he finds himself in a room alongside a weird collection of different robots, who are presumably prisoners also. However, the situation is not all bad because R2-D2 reunites at last with C-3PO. The next day, the escape pod has been found by the stormtroopers. They deduce that they are looking for droids, and they start to follow the tracks. A transporter carrying C-3PO and R2-D2 stops outside a small farm. A collection of droids, including C-3PO and R2-D2, are lined up for inspection. Living on the farm is Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill, along with his Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, played by Phil Brown and Sheila Fraser. Owen picks a small red droid first, and then he asks C-3PO a few questions about what languages he speaks. C-3PO is primarily a protocol droid, but because he can speak multiple robot languages, he is selected also. R2-D2 is not happy about being separated from C-3PO. He wants to follow C-3PO, but a Jawa turns on R2-D2's restraining bolt. However, as luck would have it, the red droid blows a motivator and stops dead in his tracks. C-3PO suggests to Luke that he select R2-D2 instead, which he does. and C-3PO is not shy in taking the credit for it either. Shortly afterward, Luke stumbles upon a holographic recording inside R2-D2 when cleaning him. The message has been recorded by Princess Leia. It's just a fragment played on loop. Leia says, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." Luke considers the fact that the message may be for Ben Kenobi, a resident of the area and something of a strange old hermit. However, there is no time to get to the bottom of things because Luke is called away for dinner by Aunt Beru. During dinner, Luke mentions the message to Owen and Beru. They seem uncomfortable when Luke mentions the name Obi-Wan Kenobi, but Luke does not see this. Owen suggests Luke forget about the message because they now own the droids. Owen suggests having the droids' memories erased the next day. Luke moves on to other subjects. He mentions that he wants to apply to the Imperial Academy this year instead of next year. Luke is a promising pilot. However, Owen is against this because harvest time is when Luke is needed most. After Luke leaves the table, Beru tells Owen, "Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him." To which Owen replies, "That's what I'm afraid of." Oh, how important that line will become in the next movie. When Luke returns to the droids, he finds that R2-D2 has gone missing. But as it is night time, it is too dangerous to track him down because of the sand people. Luke decides to go and chase after R2-D2 in the morning. In the morning, Luke and C-3PO jump aboard a floating speeder and race across the Dune Sea. They are watched from the mountain ridges by the Sand People, aka Tusken Raiders. These Tusken Raiders are a fierce nomadic race of hunter warriors that ride around on large woolly mammoth type creatures called banthas. Unfortunately, the Tusken Raiders get the jump on Luke shortly after he catches up to R2-D2 in the Judland Wastes. Luke is knocked unconscious and the speeder is ransacked. But then a mysterious cloaked figure appears and startles the Tusken Raiders, who flee. The cloaked figure checks that Luke is okay, and then he coaxes R2-D2 out of hiding. This is Ben, Obi-Wan Kenobi, played by Alec Guinness. Ben wakes Luke up. He suggests they leave before the Sand People return. They collect C-3PO, who has broken his arm in a fall, and leave. Inside Ben's home, Luke patches up C-3PO while Ben tells Luke that he was once a Jedi Knight, like Luke's father, during the Clone Wars. This is news to Luke, who believed that his father was a navigator on a spice freighter, because that's what his uncle told him. Ben has a present for Luke. It's his father's lightsaber, a laser sword. It was the weapon of the Jedi, who kept peace in the Old Republic before the Emperor came to power. When Luke asks how his father really died, Ben tells him that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered his father. Vader was seduced by the dark side of the Force, the energy field created by all living things. R2-D2 plays his full message, in which Leia calls Ben General. It turns out that Leia was on a mission to bring Ben to her home planet of Alderaan when her cruiser was attacked. She asks Ben to deliver R2-D2 to Alderaan because R2-D2 has information vital to the survival of the rebellion in his memory circuits. Ben invites Luke on his quest to Alderaan. He also offers to teach Luke about the Force. Luke is tempted by the idea, but he worries about getting into trouble with his uncle. Instead, Luke offers to take Ben to the nearest spaceport. 36 minutes in, we finally get back to the evil Empire. Vader's Star Destroyer approaches a spherical battle station the size of a moon. This is the Empire's new weapon called the Death Star. Inside a conference room, the generals debate what to do about the rebels and their missing plans. General Taggy, played by Don Henderson, declares that the Death Star is vulnerable to attack until it is fully operational. However, General Motti, played by Richard Leparmentier, ridicules Taggy's concerns. Grand Moff Tarkin, played by Peter Cushing, then enters the room, followed by Vader. It is clear that Tarkin is the top dog amongst the generals. Tarkin advises that the Emperor has dissolved the Senate Council and has given power to regional governors instead. It is fear of the Death Star that will keep the systems in line. General Motti likes this development, and he is keen for the Death Star to demonstrate its power. Unfortunately, Motti also makes the mistake of ridiculing Vader's attempt to find the Soul and Death Star plans, and Vader's sad devotion to the Jedi's ancient Force-based religion. Vader responds by squeezing his fingers, which results in Motti almost choking to death, without Vader even needing to touch him. This is the power of the Force in action. During this, Vader delivers the infamous line, "I find your lack of faith disturbing." Tarkin orders Vader to release Motti, which he does. Tarkin then promises the generals that Vader will be able to provide the location of the rebels' secret base before the Death Star becomes operational, so that the Death Star can destroy it. Meanwhile, back on Tatooine, Luke and Ben come across the bodies of some Jawas. It's the same Jawas that sold the droids to Uncle Owen. The evidence points to the Sand People being responsible for this crime, yet Ben suggests that it looks like the work of Imperial stormtroopers instead. Luke suddenly realises that the stormtroopers might be on the way to Uncle Owen's farm, so Luke jumps in his speeder and races off. He's too late. Back at the farm, Luke discovers Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's charred remains. Luke has no other option now other than to join Ben on his quest to Alderaan and to learn the ways of the Force. All this time, Princess Leia has been kicking back on her heels in a cell on the Death Star. At last, Vader arrives to interrogate her about the location of the secret rebel base, and he has brought along a floating robot equipped with hypodermic syringes too. Luke, Ben and the droids arrive at Mos Eisley spaceport. Unfortunately, the first thing they run into is a patrol of stormtroopers who start asking questions about the droids. Luckily, Ben uses the Force to influence the mind of the lead stormtrooper. "These aren't the droids you're looking for," suggests Ben. Luke and Ben go into a cantina looking for a freighter pilot. As the cantina doesn't serve droids, they are forced to wait outside. The cantina has a mixture of humanoids and weird-looking alien creatures who spend their time socialising and listening to the upbeat jazz music courtesy of Figrin D'an and the modal nodes. Ben goes off to find a freighter pilot while Luke has a drink. Luke gets accosted by a walrus man called Ponda Baba, played by Tommy Ilsley, and his pig-nosed partner in crime, Dr. Cornelius Everzan, played by Alfie Curtis. Ben comes to the rescue and tries to defuse the situation, but Everzan is spoiling for a fight and reaches for his gun. Ben reacts instantly and uses his own lightsaber to cut off Everzan's arm. The cantina patrons are shocked for about 3 seconds. They return immediately to what they were doing before, and the modal nodes start to play once more. Ben introduces Luke to Chewbacca, played by Peter Mayhew. Chewbacca is a 7-foot-tall Wookiee, which is a cross between a bear and a Sasquatch. He is first mate on a ship called the Millennium Falcon, which is owned by a human smuggler called Han Solo, played by Harrison Ford. Han boasts of the alleged speed of the Millennium Falcon. He declares that it's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. Han asks for 10,000 for passage to the Alderaan system. Ben negotiates 2,000 up front, plus another 15 when they get to Alderaan. An agreement is reached, and Ben and Luke head off to avoid being questioned by the stormtroopers that have just arrived in the cantina. Han sends Chewbacca off to get the ship ready, but when Han tries to leave, he is stopped by a green alien bounty hunter called Greedo, played by Paul Blake. Greedo works for Jabba the Hutt, a big-time local gangster. It appears that Han had to dump some of Jabba's cargo when he last got boarded by the authorities. Now Jabba has put a bounty on Han's head. During their conversation, Han slips out his blaster and shoots Greedo dead. Yes folks, Han shoots first in the original version of the movie. On the way out of the bar, Han tosses a credit to the barman and says, "Sorry about the mess." Back on the Death Star, Vader announces that Leia has resisted the mind probe. Tarkin, therefore, suggests an alternative form of persuasion, and the course is set for Leia's home planet of Alderaan. When Luke, Ben and the droids first encounter the Millennium Falcon, Luke says, "What a piece of junk." Han suggests that she might not look like much, but she's got it where it counts. As everyone gets on board, stormtroopers arrive and they start shooting. Han shoots back and he orders Chewbacca to take off. The Falcon blasts into space, but is immediately hunted down by 3 Imperial Star Destroyers. Han tries to avoid getting shot down while the Navi computer calculates the coordinates for the jump to light speed. Eventually, the Falcon disappears into hyperspace. When the Death Star arrives in orbit next to Alderaan, Vader brings Leia out to meet Tarkin. Leia is told that Alderaan will be destroyed unless Leia can provide the location of the rebel base. Leia is forced to relent and names the planet of Dantooine. In true villain fashion, Tarkin then orders Alderaan to be destroyed anyway. The Death Star fires up and Alderaan explodes. Ben feels this disturbance in the Force, and he is visibly shaken by it. Ben tries to figure out what has happened while Luke practices with the lightsaber. At the same time, R2-D2 plays Chewbacca at holographic chess. It turns out that Chewbacca is a sore loser, so C-3PO suggests R2-D2 let the Wookiee win. When Han mocks the concept of the mystical energy field that is the Force, Ben puts a helmet on Luke's head. With the blast shield down, Luke can't even see. However, after he reaches out with his feelings, he fends off multiple attacks from a remote device with his lightsaber. When Tarkin is advised that scouts report the rebel base on Dantooine has been deserted for some time, he orders the termination of Leia. The Falcon arrives at Alderaan. The only problem is that Alderaan is not there anymore. It's just a debris field. An Imperial TIE fighter suddenly appears. The Falcon chases after it so that it can prevent informing the Empire of the Falcon's whereabouts. But the fighter leads the Falcon towards the Death Star, which is first mistaken as a small moon. By the time everyone on the Falcon realises what the Death Star is, it's too late. The Falcon is caught in a tractor beam and pulled inside. When the Falcon is opened up, Luke, Han and the others are nowhere to be seen. While the ship's log suggests that the crew abandoned ship soon after takeoff, Vader senses the presence of his old master. He orders a scanning crew to be sent aboard. It turns out that everyone was hiding in the Falcon's smuggling compartments. The group hijack the scanning crew and steal some stormtrooper uniforms. They trick their way into a command centre and start blasting. Luke closes the galaxy's fastest closing door behind them and then tells the others off for making so much noise. R2-D2 plugs into the network and searches for the power supply to the tractor beam. Ben tells the others to stay put while he goes off to put the tractor beam out of commission. Before he goes, Ben tells Luke, "The Force will be with you, always." Left alone in the command centre, Luke and Han start to argue. They are interrupted when R2-D2 discovers that Leia is on board the space station and is scheduled to be terminated. Luke wants to go and rescue Leia, but Ham is determined to stay put. That is until Luke tells Han that Leia is rich. Luke and Han march into the detention centre with Chewbacca pretending to be their prisoner. When the plan starts to fall apart, the shooting starts and all the guards are killed, and an excessive amount of video cameras are also destroyed. Luke sets Leia free, but their escape is blocked when more stormtroopers arrive. With nowhere else to go, Leia blasts a hole in the wall and jumps down the garbage chute. Locked in a water-filled, magnetically sealed room, the group argue amongst themselves. The arguing stops when a tentacled beast drags Luke under the water. The good news is that the beast eventually lets Luke go. The bad news is that the walls start to move in. They are inside a trash compactor. Luke calls C-3PO for help on a comlink, but the droids are hiding from stormtroopers at the time, so C-3PO doesn't answer. When C-3PO finally uses the comlink, the droids are back in the hangar opposite the Falcon. There isn't much time left. R2-D2 plugs into a circuit in the wall and manages to shut down the trash compactor just in the nick of time. Han and Luke discard the uniforms and they try to make it back to the Falcon. That's if they don't kill each other first. Leia is a bit bossy and Han doesn't like that very much. More stormtroopers arrive and this splits up the group. Han and Chewbacca go in one direction while Luke and Leia go in another. Luke and Leia end up trapped in a chasm between floors with no bridge across. Luke uses a grappling hook found in his utility belt to secure a rope to some machinery above. The couple swings across to safety, but not before Leia kisses Luke for luck. Meanwhile, Ben sneaks around the Death Star. He manages to turn down the power to the tractor beam, but on his return to meet the others, he comes face to face with Vader. A lightsaber battle follows, and Ben seems to give as good as he gets despite his age. Vader and Ben fight next to the hangar holding the Falcon. The stormtroopers on guard get distracted and go to watch the fight. This is the opportunity everyone needs to get aboard the Falcon, because by this time they have all assembled in the hangar. When Luke spots Ben fighting, he stops to watch. Ben then decides to sacrifice himself and he disappears into thin air just as Vader takes a swing at him. Luke cries out, which alerts the stormtroopers. More shooting follows. Luckily, Luke blasts the internal hangar door and this keeps Vader out of the hangar. As Luke fights, he hears Ben's voice in his head telling him to run. Luke gets inside the Falcon and the ship takes off. After a brief moment of reflection about Ben, the Falcon encounters several TIE fighters. These are sentry ships. Luke and Han man the gun turrets while Chewbacca flies the Falcon. In a spectacular dogfight, punctuated by glimpses of comedy from the droids, 4 TIE fighters are destroyed and the Falcon escapes. Han finds Leia in the Falcon's cockpit and compliments himself on Leia's rescue, but Leia fails to be impressed. She is aware that the Falcon is probably being tracked. The only saving grace is the fact that they still have R2-D2. When Han asks Leia what the fuss is all about, Leia explains that R2-D2 is carrying the technical plans of the Death Star. Now it's Han's turn to be unimpressed. He's not interested in the Death Star or the rebel cause, he's in it for the money. Disgusted, Leia walks out. She is replaced in the cockpit by Luke. Han chats to Luke about Leia, and it is clear that Luke fancies her. Han spots this immediately, and he pretends to be interested in Leia just to irritate Luke. The Falcon lands on a moon orbiting the gas giant planet of Yavin. The moon is known as Yavin 4. In a hangar containing rebel spaceships, Leia is reunited with General Dodonna, played by Alex McCrindle. Leia instructs Dodonna to download the Death Star plans from R2-D2. There is no time to lose because the Death Star suddenly appears in the Yavin system and proceeds to orbit the planet. Luckily, Dodonna is instantly able to interpret the plans. In a briefing to Pilot, Dodonna announces his clever plan to destroy the Death Star by sending a single fighter to torpedo a small thermal exhaust port. The chain reaction caused will lead to the destruction of the Death Star. Dodonna sends the pilots to their ships by announcing, "May the Force be with you." Luke changes into a pilot's costume. When he passes Han and Chewbacca in the hangar, he finds them loading money onto the Falcon. Luke tells Han that the rebels need a good pilot like him, but Han merely replies by saying, "What good is a reward if you ain't around to use it?" Luke is frustrated by Han's attitude and leaves, but as Luke leaves, Han repeats the mantra, "May the Force be with you." Luke next encounters Leia in the hangar. She isn't so upset about Han leaving, suggesting that Han has to follow his own path. Leia kisses Luke once again and allows him to get into his ship. Luke's ship is an X-Wing starfighter. It's a ship that has a space for an astromech droid to be placed behind the pilot, so R2-D2 is loaded into place. C-3PO appears and tells R2-D2 to come back safely. As Luke takes off, he hears Ben's voice again. "The Force will be with you," he says. Leia and C-3PO make their way to the war room as the rebel fighters approach the Death Star. Everyone is told that the Death Star will be in range of the rebel base in 15 minutes. One way or another, it will all be over soon. The 30 X-Wing and Y-Wing fighters finally attack the Death Star. It's the most amazing aerial space battle you have ever seen. The special effects are amazing, and this is before the age of CGI. Everything you see is an actual physical model, which makes everything even more impressive. When Vader is told that the rebel fighters are so small they are evading the turbo lasers, Vader suggests the fleet be sent out to destroy them ship to ship. One by one, various sections of rebel fighters attempt to complete the mission and fire torpedoes down the exhaust port, but each one fails. When the TIE fighters arrive, even more rebel ships are destroyed. As the number of glorious death scenes begin to add up, we start to worry that the mission will not be successful, and all the time the Death Star is creeping closer to firing range. Vader gets bored of watching the battle from inside the Death Star, so he recruits 2 pilots to follow him out into space. Vader has his own unique design of TIE fighter, which conveniently helps us to identify where he is in the battle. A bunch of Y-wing fighters enters the trench that leads to the exhaust port. They use a targeting computer to count down the distance to their target. It seems like a long way away when you're under fire from laser cannons and enemy fighters. Vader enters the trench flanked by 2 TIE fighters. He chases down the Y-wings and blows them up. In a quiet moment, a commander tells Tarkin that, having analysed the rebels' attack, there is a danger. However, Tarkin scoffs at the idea of evacuating in their moment of triumph, so he's not going anywhere. Back in the trench, Vader destroys some more rebel fighters. The tension is almost unbearable, while the Red leader, Garvin Drace, played by Drew Hendley, manages to fire off 2 torpedoes. They only impact on the surface. Before Vader finishes the Red leader off, he instructs Luke to get set up for his attack run. The only pilots now left are Luke and 2 other pilots called Biggs and Wedge, played by Garrick Hagan and Dennis Lawson. Biggs is an old friend of Luke's, and deleted scenes from this movie will show you a lot more of him. Luke and the others enter the trench. Luke asks R2-D2 to fix a stabiliser that has broken loose. R2-D2 acts as a mobile mechanic, and tools emerge from inside R2-D2 to fix the problem. Vader and the other TIE fighters chase after the X-Wings. Wedge's X-Wing is hit, and he has to break formation. Biggs is the next to be hit, but unfortunately he does not survive. Now there is nothing between Vader and Luke's ship. Luke turns on his targeting computer, but the exhaust port is still miles away. What is Luke going to do? Just then Luke hears Ben's voice again. "Use the Force, Luke," Ben instructs him. Following this, Luke switches off his targeting computer. Following close behind, Vader comments to himself, "The Force is strong with this one." He takes a shot at the X-Wing and manages to blast a hole in the top of R2-D2's head. Back in the war room on Yavin 4, C-3PO and Leia are listening to Luke's radio. When Luke tells them that he has lost R2, C-3PO shows concern. Not that C-3PO can look concerned because he has a fixed moulded face, but you get the impression that he's worried from his body language. And now for the worst news. The Death Star has cleared the planet and the rebel base is in range. Tarkin orders the Death Star to fire when ready. As the Death Star warms up its primary weapon, Vader closes in on Luke. But at the last moment, the TIE fighter next to Vader is blown up. Who did this? It's the Millennium Falcon! Han and Chewbacca have returned after all. The other TIE fighter pilot clips Vader's fighter and Vader spins off into deep space. Just after this, Han announces, "You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home." As instructed, Luke uses the Force and fires his torpedoes at the exact moment necessary. Luke and the others then flee the Death Star before it explodes. Job done. There is just time for Ben to repeat the line, "Remember, the Force will be with you, always." But what about Vader? In true villain style, he'll be back in the sequel. Back on Yavin 4, Luke, Leia and Han reunite. Unfortunately, the celebrations are cut short when R2-D2's shell is dragged out of the X-Wing. C-3PO offers to donate any circuits or gears necessary for his repairs. Not to worry, the technicians will get to work on R2-D2 right away. Sometime later, a ceremony is arranged. All the rebels line up to offer thanks to Luke, Han and Chewbacca. Luke and Han are given medals, as repaired and polished up versions of R2-D2 and C-3PO look on. The main cast turn around and take a bow, to the welcome cheers and applause of the rebels, and the audience in the movie theatre. Issues. During the attack on Leia's cruiser, the escape pod containing C-3PO and R2-D2 is jettisoned. "There goes another one," comments a soldier on the Star Destroyer. However, when the commander talks to Vader later, he advises that only one escape pod was jettisoned during the battle. Vader tells Leia that the Death Star plans were beamed aboard her ship. If this technology exists, why couldn't the plans be beamed or emailed directly to the rebel base? We know that interstellar communication exists because scouts report back to the Death Star from the planet of Dantooine. The rebels could have saved themselves a lot of time and trouble if they did this. When Ben Kenobi first encounters R2-D2, he states, "I don't seem to remember ever owning a droid." Remember this piece of dialogue for reviews of further movies. C-3PO tells Luke that he is being created for human-cyborg relations. The problem is, C-3PO isn't a cyborg, because cyborgs incorporate human body parts. C-3PO is just a robot. Luke, Owen and Beru live on a farm, but what exactly is it they are supposed to farm? Tatooine is a desert planet, and there are no fields of crops in any of the shots. Are the crops underground? I think we are missing an explanation here. Research will tell you that Uncle Owen owned a moisture farm, which explains why he talks about condensers in the movie. But you should not have to research something that should be explained to you in the movie itself. There does not appear to be any recognition of Leia or her name by Ben when R2-D2's message is played to him. Remember this for reviews of further movies. When Luke and Ben encounter the slaughtered Jawas on Tatooine, Ben says only Imperial stormtroopers are so precise. Obviously the stormtroopers that kill the Jawas are not the same stormtroopers that get into a fight with Luke, Han and Leia on the Death Star, because those stormtroopers can't shoot for shit. Why do the stormtroopers try to blame the attack on the Jawas on the Sand People? Even if the stormtroopers were on a secret mission to recover the Death Star plans, the stormtroopers work for the Empire. No one is going to question them about their motivations. The whole scenario is unnecessary, especially as the stormtroopers did nothing to frame the Sand People for the murder of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. When Han boasts about the alleged speed of the Millennium Falcon, he declares that it's the ship that made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. The problem with this statement is that a parsec is a unit of distance, not time. I think this was a mistake. There is actually an attempt to correct or clarify this error in a later movie, but you'll have to wait for that review. If Han Solo owns Jabba the Hutt money, why is Han even on Tatooine, let alone drinking in a bar in the heart of his territory? The Death Star is huge, I mean really huge. It's as big as a moon. It's probably the biggest construction project ever undertaken in the galaxy. The idea of keeping it a secret is a bit ridiculous if you think about it. Star Wars has the same problem that a lot of James Bond movies have. The discovery of a secret lair that is so impossibly large, it would never have been a secret in the first place. If the Death Star is spherical like a moon, and it has construction and armaments all around the surface, where do the engines go? If the Death Star doesn't have any engines, how does it move through space? More specifically, how does the Death Star jump into light speed and travel through hyperspace? Why does Han ask Chewbacca to lock in the auxiliary power twice when the control is right next to Han, and he could have easily done it himself? When Vader senses the presence of his old master aboard the Falcon, why doesn't he use his Force sense to locate exactly where Ben and the others are? If he did, he would have gotten the stolen Death Star plans he was after as a bonus. The lightsaber fight between Vader and Ben Kenobi may seem a little unimpressive by the standards of the later movies, but back in 1977 it was the coolest thing ever, particularly as no one had ever seen laser swords before. Why don't any of the stormtroopers follow the heroes when they disappear down the garbage chute? How did the trash compactor beast get inside the trash compactor? The Death Star is a battle station constructed in space. It's not built on a planet infested with indigenous life forms. Bearing in mind the Death Star has thousands of cannons, why don't any of them shoot at the Falcon as it leaves when Leia is rescued? And why didn't the Death Star launch any ships in pursuit? The TIE fighters that attack the Falcon are sentry ships, so they are already out in space. Couldn't Han have started calculations for the jump to light speed at the moment he left the Death Star? If he did this, he might have been able to enter hyperspace before encountering the TIE fighters, and thus avoid risking the Falcon's destruction. You could argue that the plan all along was to allow the Falcon to escape, but you don't get this impression when the TIE fighters are shooting at the Falcon. If everyone had orders to let the Falcon escape, they wouldn't have attacked it in the first place, just in case they destroyed it by accident. How does the connection between the gun turrets work in the Falcon? Luke and Han sit in opposite gun turrets, one above and one below, i.e. vertical. Yet when Luke and Han talk to each other, the connection between them seems horizontal. How does that work? Bearing in mind that Leia suspects the Falcon has a homing beacon on board, which it does, why would she be stupid enough to take the Falcon directly to the secret rebel base on Yavin 4? Why not call for help and transfer to another rebel ship in the middle of space and then go to Yavin 4? Leia has no idea that any weaknesses will be found when the Death Star plans are analysed, or how long any attack plan may take to formulate. According to the script, and the original cut of the movie, the Death Star was never on its way to destroy the rebel base at the exact moment the rebel fleet was sent against it. This was something that was created in the editing room, so kudos to the editors Marcia Lucas, Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew, who all got Oscars for best editing. As the top personnel from both the Empire and the rebel forces are ranked generals, I was confused when they are repeatedly called commanders, which is an entirely different rank. When the rebel fighters pass through the Death Star's magnetic field, the fighters are miles away from the Death Star. However, when the Falcon is pulled towards the Death Star by a tractor beam, the magnetic field doesn't have to be opened until the Falcon is a few hundred metres away. Why didn't anyone from the Death Star fire at the rebel fighters as they approached the Death Star? It's not until the fighters start skimming the surface that the fighters are shot at. Are you telling me that the Death Star is incapable of shooting down something the size of a rebel fighter? If this is the case, then the Death Star's defences suck, and it was a good job for the Empire that the rebels did not possess any nuclear missiles. If they did, all they would have had to do is fire one from their base on Yavin 4 and sit back and watch, because the Death Star would not have been able to shoot the missile down. When Wedge's X-Wing fighter is hit during the final trench run, he declares that he can't stay in formation, and Luke agrees. I don't understand this at all. The only purpose for the X-Wings behind Luke is to block the TIE fighters from firing at him, so why does Wedge fly away? It was a shame that the rebels didn't have any heat-seeking missiles when they attacked the Death Star, bearing in mind they were shooting at a thermal exhaust port. Why didn't anyone from the Death Star fire at the rebel ships as they were leaving after the battle? They would have made pretty easy targets, wouldn't they? Who was flying the Y-Wing fighter that survived the attack on the Death Star, and why didn't he, or her, help Luke out during his attack run? Why don't Chewbacca, Wedge or that mystery Y-Wing pilot get any medals during the awards ceremony? Highly ungrateful, I think. Review. Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope is a perfect movie, and its legendary status is well deserved. I cry all the time at movies when things are sad, but I rarely cry at movies through sheer excitement or enjoyment. This is one of those movies. The movie is perfectly balanced. The amazing action and special effects dazzle us, while the quieter moments help us to empathise with the characters or make us laugh. Star Wars is such an influential movie, it created its own pop culture. Not only this, it changed the ways movies were made and marketed. The fact that we have action figures and merchandising of all kinds when a movie is launched today is a direct result of Star Wars. Not only is George Lucas a genius writer and director, but he is also a genius businessman. On a technical level, the production and art design is simply out of this world. Yes, the pun was intended. The designs for characters, aliens, spaceships, interiors, weapons and uniforms are all iconic and are still used to this day. The same can be said for the sound design. Who on the planet would not be able to recognise the sound of a blaster, or a lightsaber, or Darth Vader's breathing? And underpinning everything is a superb score by John Williams. All Oscars are well deserved in this movie. My rating, 100%. Hi, this is Mike Kendall, and thanks for watching my video. I'd like to know what you thought of this movie. Was it a hit? Was it a flop? Let me know your thoughts and rating in the comments section. You can also tell me what other movies you'd like to see reviews for. Please like and subscribe, and remember to hit that notification bell for all my new videos. Sharing these videos on Facebook and Twitter would help me out a lot. I'd sure appreciate it. Don't forget to check out the other videos on my channel. We're adding more all the time. I'm off to see a movie. You have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.